talk about travel. Hello there. I think it's time that we reconsider how we think about travel. Definitely, we could think of it more holistically. So I think probably travel could be the most underdeveloped industry for developing human capital. Probably the biggest example of that is right now we think of travel mostly as vacation and business. The typical question is, are you traveling for business or pleasure? But other than that, it's not very developed as a concept. So I think we could probably benefit from developing it as a concept. And so what that might look like is just parsing out all the different ways we can travel. Geographically is perhaps the most obvious one, but we still refer to things as a journey. We are somewhat accustomed to the concept of traveling ideologically, and then within that, like you start to understand how you could travel socially. We think of like social mobility, and a country is thought to be better if you're able to travel socially. Physically, we talk about taking a journey with our bodies to get healthy again. Certainly, we would be familiar with the concept of a spiritual journey. Obviously, there's vacation and fun. And all of these, to some degree, are reflected in the travel industry. So these are a few of the ways we might consider rounding out the way that we think of travel. We have travel for educational purposes, cultural, intellectual, etc. And so it's in this framework for travel that we start to understand that the most robust forms of travel would include more rather than less of these types of travel. And so when we start to take seriously all the forms of travel and add them together, that's where I'm starting to say that travel is perhaps one of the most underutilized forms of developing human capital. The travel or the travel industry is one of the most untapped sources for development of human capital, for businesses, for society. So think of like if every college graduate in the US had also traveled fairly thoroughly across like 3 or 5 continents. So they had an expansive view of 4 or 5 continents. How would that change the way that they did their jobs? I think of, not to get too political, but think of Hillary Clinton. Like, how would her candidacy have been different if she were willing to travel to Pennsylvania, Ohio, Florida, Michigan, etc., right? How would our politicians be different people if they traveled and seriously connected with the people who, that's more socioeconomic or cultural, subcultural travel. But like, how would our leaders be different if they had a somewhat thorough or expansive experience with 4 or 5 continents, with most of the world? And I mean that as a baseline, because many of them do eventually end up traveling the world simply because of their job. But because it's for their job, it necessarily precludes traveling in many of the ways which we've spoken about. It's go time.